This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds, and I'm here with my special guest today, Mark Finchem, former representative and candidate for the Secretary of State in Arizona. Mark, welcome to the Colonel Truth.
Well, thank you for having me on, Colonel. It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Absolutely. And I'm going to tell some people a little bit later about how we first met, but I'd like for you to introduce yourself to our audience. They don't know anything about you. They've heard your name a little bit about Arizona. Of course, we're in Arkansas. Can you tell us a little bit about your life? I know you're from Michigan, and I know you're a police officer, but people need to know these things about the people that are fighting for election integrity. So I'm going to give it over to you a little bit.
All right. Thank you very much, Colonel.
Yeah.
So if folks watch Bannon's War Room at all, or Stu Peters, or Pete Santilli, or some of the more reliable alternative media outlets, they probably have seen me a time or two. I did 21 years of service as a public safety officer in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Now that's firefighter, paramedic, level 3 paramedic, and law enforcement officer, kind of all wrapped into one great big sandwich of service, if you will. Retired in 1999, moved to Tucson, Arizona, where I worked for a number of different companies. I was retired, so I could. That was the best part. I was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives, served for 8 years there, and established myself as a pretty assertive conservative. I was accused of being a far right-wing conservative, but when you stand your ground and the left keeps moving further and further left, you're still a center-right Republican. They're the ones that have gone literally over the edge.
Right.
So that's where we're at today. In the 2022 midterm election, I ran for Secretary of State, took over 1.28 million votes.
Wow. Across
the state of Arizona. The adversary, a Sinaloa cartel lawyer, Adrian Fontes, the powers that be were able to inject enough fraud into the election. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's been following Gateway Pundit or even you will know that here in Arizona, the Maricopa County election in 2022 can only be described as a steaming garbage heap. They didn't follow process. They broke the law all over the place, and then they were called on it. They perjured themselves in court. They've hidden evidence. They refused to answer questions. This is an organization that, if given the chance, I think they need to be, every one of the board of supervisors and the recorder and the elections director need to be charged with racketeering, because that's what they engaged in.
Right. This is all Maricopa County you're talking about.
This is all Maricopa County. Yeah. Now, the same could be said for a close examination of Pima County, which is the Tucson area, and then Pinell County, which is the county in between Tucson and Phoenix. Mm-hmm. The same could be said for those two organizations, governmental organizations, because what we're talking about here is sovereign fraud. Right. This is the fraud where individuals charged with following the law either refuse to or ignored the law. Mm-hmm. Well, when you ignore the law, bad things happen. You commit misdemeanors. And in fact, everything in the election procedure manual in the state of Arizona that they don't do is a violation of Title 16, which is election law. And in doing that, they are committing a misdemeanor each and every time they interact with a ballot. So if you have 10,000 ballots, you have 10,000 instances of crime. Mm-hmm. Go figure. So we are still in court over a number of issues. Kerry Lake and Abe Hamaday have the two best cases. My third case, we withdrew once it was dismissed by the pretty radical leftist judge that's on the bench. Right. In fact, I have two complaints about her behavior from the bench and her rather disorganized ignorance on the ethics, the canons of ethics in the courtroom. So I've made her a project. She should be removed from the bench. In fact, here in Arizona, we have this thing called a non-retention election. Judges are appointed in Maricopa County because it's one of the bigger counties. They don't run for election, but they do have to stand for retention. And if they don't score, I think it's 72 or 75% or more on an election, a vote, whether to retain or not, if they don't score high enough, they don't stay in office. The Supreme Court invites them to move on. Now, we've been given to understand in the background that she's being groomed for bigger and better things. Well, anybody who acts the way she did at the bench, which was absolutely reprehensible, who can't follow Title 16 law, who issues sanctions when she doesn't have authority to issue sanctions, all of those things, this is a crystal clear, outright ignorance of election law.
Right.
Ignorance in the fact that she just chose to ignore it and went her own way. So we're appealing that case, and I think we've got an exceptionally strong appeal. I'm told that we're probably not going to win, but we are going to reveal all the facts, peel back all the layers of this onion. And I have asked for a couple of different organizations to write amicus briefs detailing the thought process into Title 16 election law. And then, of course, because we don't know the outcome of the court cases, we are still waiting on Kerry's case to be heard by the Arizona Supreme Court, because I have a funny feeling that they are going to recognize that the trial court judge erred and claimed that there wasn't enough there to prove that a comparison of signatures was done. That wasn't the issue. That was one of the issues. Right. The fact that you can't rapid fire through documents that you're supposed to be doing a comparison with in under a second, and even claim that you did a signature comparison. Well, we've got hundreds of thousands of ballots that should not have been counted, but were counted. In fact, they were commingled with the rest of the ballots. And by virtue of the number and the sheer scope of this, that means that you cannot, the election is irredeemably compromised. It's a legal term. There's no way that you can pull the bad ballots out from the good ballots and reset the clock. So the ask is for a new election.
But in the meantime, go ahead. I got a couple of questions before we get too deep, because I think that you're one of the people that really understand what happened in Maricopa County. And here in Arkansas, I mean, of course, we hear it all the time. Well, yeah, things are bad in Arizona, but not in Arkansas, not in our county. Everything here is fine. So what I'd like to, if you could do, just take a little bit of time to put as easy in layman terms as you can. What is the problem? What happened in Maricopa, so that people in Arkansas can actually get their brain around that?
Yeah. So there's, I'm going to call them fraud vectors, because there's a number of directions where fraud, both external and internal fraud being sovereign fraud. That's the government committing fraud. Okay? Right. That's perhaps the most disturbing, because you have government officials who are supposed to be unbiased, holding a politically charged election, and they're supposed to keep their thumb off the scale of election justice. And in this case, they didn't. So let's start with the fact that the ballot tabulation equipment in Maricopa County, Dominion, was not certified, contrary to the assertion that it was. And we make that case actually in my appeal that is in front of the court right now on sanctions, that it's very specific who is supposed to sign the certification document from the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission. That person did not sign the document. And the law is super specific. In fact, there's ample case law to say that it wasn't done. So Maricopa County failed in that regard. The Arizona Secretary of State also failed in that regard. And by the way, we're not letting the pseudo-governor Katie Hobbs off the hook for this either. So then we have ballot tabulation equipment that malfunctioned. 58% of the machines in predominantly Republican districts failed on the day of the election.
What a coincidence. What a coincidence.
Miraculously, they worked right up until the day of the election. And they worked during a whole month of early voting
and Mark,
without a problem.
This is Will. I want to jump in. Yeah, during early voting, it worked. And in Arizona, the mantra was Republicans come vote on election day. So that's why it's a big deal that it didn't work on election day, correct?
That's right. That's exactly correct. So, and by the way, Carrie Lake and I have a case in front of the U.S. Ninth Circuit to ban the use of black box ballot tabulation equipment, Dominion ES&S. If we can't inspect the code, then it has no business being used in the public sphere. period.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
If they make the claim, if they make the claim, well, it's proprietary software. Really, what is so damn proprietary about counting bubbles on a piece of paper?
It doesn't matter if it's to me, if it's proprietary, then it doesn't belong in elections, period. We don't need you.
Exactly.
Period.
This needs to be open source software that the public can inspect. So the two things that are upstream from election integrity are election security and election transparency. And here the county has failed in regard to both of those things. So they told us that there was no access by internet. Well, of course, they knew they were lying because they were actually trained on the access by internet. Then we've got, and all of this is bubbling up because of the Kerry Lake investigation team. I mean, they're doing just yeoman's work on revealing the fraud that was involved in Maricopa County. So then we come to find out that the county knowingly used a version of software on the Dominion machines that had not been certified. By definition, that means that the election that they certified was illegitimate. Under law, illegitimate. So the court's going to have a prickly time trying to justify holding an election on software that was not approved, on machines that were not certified. In fact, here's an interesting side note. We found, actually, We the People AZ Alliance found that the machines, they're supposed to be tested in front of party officials for the certification process. I think it's 10 days in advance of the commencement of the election. Mm-hmm. Well, they did that, but apparently they didn't do all the machines. Then after that date, they secretly tested every one of the machines, and they knew before the election that the machines were likely to malfunction.
Wow.
That ought to be a jaw dropper for everybody. Yeah. And they've got the receipts. The We the People AZ Alliance.
Right.
They got the receipts. Okay. So then we've got another thing, which kind of is a segue into what I'm doing with my free time these days. And that is a voter roll analysis project. We know that there were roughly 157,000 to 257,000.
Let me butt in just a second. We got 1 minute in this section. What I like in this segment, and then we're going to come back. I want to hear about what you're doing in that, the full everything from the beginning to the end. What you're doing now in the next segment. So for the next 50 seconds, just basically right now, where do you see your particular? You say your lawsuit is no longer in effect, correct? And so we just have the two, just Kerry Lakes and
Abe Hamaday's.
And Abe Hamaday's, correct?
Yeah.
And when are they going to be going to court?
Whenever the court dockets them. So it's not as simple as just going to court. We're waiting for a date, and I think Kerry Lake has her date. Mm-hmm. Abe Hamaday, his motion for a new trial was dismissed by the trial attorney up in Mojave County, but he didn't give an order. Right. Well, you can't appeal something that doesn't have an order. And he basically said, hey, I'm retiring. I don't care. I'm not going to do it. So the Supreme Court has come down and ordered him to file an order so that Abe can appeal that. So that's where those two cases are at. Right. And my function in this right now is to work with bodies like the legislature to reassert legislative authority over election law.
Got it. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds with the Kernel of Truth. We'll be back with our special guest, Mark Finchem from Arizona, and we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to the Kernel of Truth. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds with my guest, Mr. Mark Finchem out of Arizona, and he was going to tell us what he is doing these days. Mark, will you tell us what you're doing?
Well, there's a number of people, I think, both in the Uniparty and the Democrat Party circles are probably, by the time I'm done, are going to wish that I actually was the Secretary of State because I got so much free time on my hands. We're engaged in all kinds of investigations, from money laundering that affects the political process to looking for phantom voters and phantom addresses. So about 2 years ago, we launched the Election Fairness Institute, knowing that that there were going to be individuals in both parties, both major parties, that would cheat, and they would try to inject votes into election contests that, just quite frankly, they're phantoms. If you were to try and contact the voter, good luck, because they don't list a phone number, they're registered to vote at a bodega, just all kinds of irregularities that the Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, Democrat, incompetent, and the new Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, highly competent at fraud. We've got those two individuals who are in charge of the Secretary of State's office and the voter registration process. What could possibly go wrong there? So what we're doing with the Election Fairness Institute, and people want to know more about us and about our organization, they can visit goefi.org. That's go, not stop. Go, EFI for Election Fairness Institute.org. We are 501c3, so if folks want to make a contribution to help us uncover phantom voter addresses, which is key, because if you've got addresses that are impermissible under law and people have registered to vote at those addresses, those are illegitimate ballots, any way you slice it. And appealing to the court to say, because this is impermissible under the law, this voter needs to be contacted, and essentially you need to do a canvass, if you will, of phantom voters to see if you can contact them, locate them, and certify that, yes, they did indeed cast a ballot. Now, from time to time, there may be a reason for that. Maybe somebody's building a house and the vacant lot was there, but if you have 297 people that are registered to vote at the same place, that's problematic. Okay, so the Election Fairness Institute is what we're spending most of our time on.
Right.
We're going to be speaking to this issue in Baker City, Oregon. The folks in Oregon want to take their state back. We're going to be visiting Montana, Orlando, Florida, October 13, 14, 15 for the National Federation of Republican Assemblies. That's going to be a pretty big deal. And then, of course, we've got some other events that are on the drawing board, one of them in Kauai. And
if you need any help on that one, let me know.
Yeah.
I mean,
suddenly I've got all kinds of volunteers.
Only for that one.
Only for that one, but maybe Orlando. But yeah, if you need anything, just let me know, and I'll be there because I support you, my friend.
That little 4-seater trip up to Breakneck, Montana, people probably don't want to go on that one. So the Election Fairness Institute is, we rely on small donors. You know, we've got, there's a whole lot of big donors who have said that they're going to write checks. Well, we're still waiting on that, but we have a lot of people that do a monthly recurring $20 bill. So that's giving us monthly operational costs, and we're able to do some work. We plan to do work in Arkansas to assist the effort that y'all are trying to do up there.
Yeah, we love it, man.
And frankly, we're burning daylight. I mean, we should have been doing this analysis work over this past summer so that we can establish a baseline of the people who are just fictitious voters. Mm-hmm. So we got that going on, and that plugs directly into the 2022 election, because we know that there were phantom addresses, phantom voters that were involved. It's part of the entire proofs package for all three of our lawsuits. And it also provides a glimpse for other states to see, let's perhaps follow the pathway that Arizona has laid down and look at our own stuff. Now, the folks up in Montana, for example, are saying, well, we can't get access to the records because the county won't give it to us. Well, I think you probably need to find an attorney and force them to comply with the public records request law that's on the books up there. Mm-hmm. And by the way, your legislature does hold the keys to the kingdom when it comes to the power of the purse. So if you have recalcitrant county governments that tell the voters to bugger off, perhaps a little memo about, we do approve your state shared revenue.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Might want to rethink your position on opening up the record book. So. Right. And then, of course, because this is a big undertaking, and we're a small outfit right now. We have a board of 4, adding another board member today. Seth Keschel is on our board, Captain K.
Captain K.
Heather Hobbs.
Yep.
And we're going to be adding another gentleman who is a rock star in Wisconsin, engaged in looking at election fraud. Now, because we're a 501c3, we do not engage ourselves in any political fracases. We don't advocate for law. We don't advocate for party, persons, or proposals. What we do is we study defects we study process in order to try and locate what are the defects in these processes. And when we publish a finding, we're simply saying, this is what this process has done, and this is how it's been perverted. This is how it distorts the election. I'm reasonably certain that qualified legislators can read a report like that and come up with their own ideas on how to fix the defect.
Right. So you're providing information. You're providing actionable information to a state legislature.
Exactly.
Say, here's what you got. Either it's up to you to do it or not.
Right. And of course, the distribution plan for that information, because transparency is a big deal to us. Security and transparency are the two things that are upstream from election integrity. So if we're going to have that information as transparent as possible, that means that we need to supply it to a long list of individuals every time we come up with a report. So say, for example, we did a report on a particular area of Arkansas. We would notify the Secretary of State in Arkansas. We would notify the county officials that are affected. So whether you have supervisors or commissioners, whatever format you have there.
Right.
We would also notify the elections director, whoever's responsible for conducting the election, along with whoever's responsible for registering voters. And then, shocker, we would send this information to the recognized party chairs for all parties. Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green, I don't know what other animal you have in your state. Every one of those party chairs for the state would receive the same report at the same time that the government officials receive it. And we would make sure that the media had access to the full report. Now, it's our belief that in doing that, you leave no place for the roaches that have infested our election process to hide. As Justice Brandeis said, a bright light, paraphrased, a bright light is the best disinfectant on fraud.
Absolutely. And it looks like this effort, now you've been doing it, we've got a minute left in this segment, but so you started this when? Just a few months ago, right?
A couple of years ago.
A couple of years ago.
We started a 501c3 about 3 years ago. Then we shifted the name. We changed the name, shifted the mission a little bit, and then about 2 years ago we stood this up, knowing full well that those people who have been committing fraud for decades, they're not going to stop committing fraud. Now it's a case of, with the investigators that we've got, both criminal and civil, we're looking under the hood of everybody's pickup truck right now.
Well, that is, I love it. I love it. Listen, I want to talk to you in the next segment here when we come back about, because you were a legislator for 4 terms, 8 years, right? And I want you to talk about the role of a state legislature when it comes to election integrity. What is it they should be doing right now in order to get their election straight? We'll be back in just a few minutes. I'm Colonel Conrad Reynolds with the Colonel of Truth with my special guest, Mark Finchem out of Arizona. We'll be right back. This is Colonel Conrad Reynolds. Welcome back to the Colonel of Truth. I'm here with my special guest, Mark Finchem out of Arizona, the former candidate for the Secretary of State there in 2022. And Mark, you were in the state legislature for 8 years, 4 terms there in Arizona before you ran from 2015 to 2022. We in Arkansas, we have people, we got some really good ones, but we've got a lot of them that simply have no backbone. They're not willing to stand up and fight for election integrity. They say there's just nothing I can do, or they simply refuse to listen to the evidence that is right before them that shows them that there is a problem. And you've been through this in Arizona, and people weren't listening to you guys several years ago, and then you had this fiasco in 2020 and 2022. Can you tell me what your advice is? What do we tell these legislators?
I have 2 answers for you. The short one is fire them. You're fired. You have disrespected the constituents that you were elected to serve, to represent. Represent's a curious word. To represent. To make sure that what's being presented to you in the form of testimony and evidence, if it leads to the uncovering of a defect in your process, I don't want to hear anybody say there's nothing I can do, because that's a damn lie.
Right.
That's deceptive. And when you sit there and say, well, there's not much we can do about it because I can't, it's the same thing as I won't. Mm-hmm. And if you've got legislators that say that they can't, there's an old saying, and I'm sure you're familiar with it: lead, follower, get out of the way.
Right. Oh yeah, that's a good one.
If you want to sit in the rear echelon and you want to be that glad-hander that's, out there saying, oh yeah, I stand for this. Okay, what did you do for me lately has got to be the question. So let's roll back to, here's the long answer. Let's roll back to November 30th, 2020. On November 10th, which was about 5 days, I forget the date of the election. I can't remember if it was November 3rd or November 8th. But on or about November 10th, we had received so many calls in my office. This is when I was the chairman of the Federal Relations Committee in the House of Representatives.
Okay.
We didn't have an elections committee that was functional. It was a very dysfunctional committee. So I had lots of constituents, both my own and people from all over the state, contacting my office. Senator Sonny Borelli, Representative Leo Biasucci. I mean, they call us two Italians in a mutt. Guess which one I am. But we recognize that our constituents were not just angry, they were apoplectic over what they were witnessing. They knew full well that the election had so many irregularities in it that it was not trustworthy. So I approached our House leadership. They slow walked me, and I finally said, okay, you've got until noon, and I forget what day it was, but you've got until noon to give me the go-ahead to use state resources to hold an ad hoc hearing on election integrity in Maricopa County. And they slow walked me until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, well, it's too late. We've signed a contract with the Hyatt Regency downtown. We're moving forward with hearing. So thanks, but no thanks. We're done. Well, from that, we had 10 and a half hours of testimony that showed empirically, categorically, that there were so many problems, so many irregularities with the election just in Maricopa County, that it was irredeemably compromised and should not be trusted. We recommended that the state of Arizona hold its electors. Interestingly enough, while we were having that hearing on the exact same day, we started at 9 o'clock in the morning. At 10:30 in the morning, the governor, Secretary of State, and the Attorney General met and certified the canvass that put Joe Biden in office in Arizona. Mm-hmm. Now, there's no reason why they could not have watched the entire hearing, except we saw the level of contempt that the then governor, Doug Ducey, had when asked about the hearing. He said, it's a meeting. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, forgive me. You're going to have to bleep this out. No shit. Every single time the legislature convenes an ad hoc hearing or a scheduled hearing, it's a meeting. Thank you for giving us the obvious. But in that moment, he showed where he stood. He did not stand with the people of Arizona.
Right.
He stood with the uniparty that wanted us to just shut up and sit down. So the reason I bring that up, it's been a painful 2 years, going on 3 years now. Mm-hmm. A lot of change in my life. But I did one thing that I will remain forever proud of, and that is I did what my constituents asked me to do. I stood up, I asked questions, I sought truth. Now, I was vilified, continued to this day. You go out to Wikipedia, and they're calling me everything but a sane man. Interesting that we are being vindicated daily about the fraud and abuse of power by elected officials and bureaucrats all across this land, from Michigan to Arizona to Florida, all the way up to Oregon. Mm-hmm. Border to border and sea to sea.
Yeah, if they can't win the argument,
is awash
well, it's
with
obvious.
Individuals. Mm-hmm. Well, we're awash with individuals who make the claim, well, there's nothing I can do. Then why the hell are you in office? Mm-hmm. Get out of office. If you're not going to lead, get out of office. If you're in office and you want to be friends with everybody, here's my advice. Go get a puppy.
That's
You're
right.
not there to be everybody's friend. You're there to seek truth and do something about defects in the law, defects in process that diminish the civil rights of the people who put you in office. And if you can't do that, get out.
Right. Well, I think it's great advice, and I think people need to be listening to what you're saying, because what we see over and over again, they simply parrot and repeat what they've heard by other people, and they refuse to ask additional questions. They refuse to want to get down to the bottom of it, and they'll just give us the same old, well, you know what, we haven't seen any fraud. If you got evidence, bring it, but we haven't seen it. The Secretary of State here says the machines are great. By the way, we use ES&S.
Heritage Foundation.
It says we're number 4, and we're trying to get to number 1 in the Heritage scorecard. So therefore, we're great. There's no problem here in Arkansas, and they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue what they're talking about, and we're going to prove that here because we have a court case coming up. And so, but we're going to be able to prove that, and I think that will wake everybody up. But I think that right now, unfortunately, we got too many people who simply are wanting a new position. They want a new committee. They want to be in charge, and they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be the outsider. They don't want to be the one that's not invited to the parties. And
there's a very thin pool of donors in Arkansas, and a lot of the legislators, I think, are scared of rocking that apple cart of those donors who actually pull the strings here in Arkansas.
Yeah, because
the question then becomes: do you want to have an election or a selection? Do you want to have a simulation of an election, or do you want to have a real election? And I would say to the donors, be careful what you fund, because right now you are funding the takedown of the United States of America. Right. When you have legislators who won't do their damn job, what you're doing is you are acquiescing to the radical left and the uniparty that, sure, they may represent you for a while, but with all due respect, donor class, I don't think you want to be that group of people that Stalin called the useful idiots.
Right.
You're useful only as long as you're giving money to the people that the uniparty, that the radical left, that the New World Order wants you to give money to. Now, there will come a day where your money will be worthless.
So what we're going to do...
Be very careful the horses that you back.
I think that's great advice. Well, listen, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I got a couple of questions for you. We want to talk about your election. And we also want to talk a little bit about the process that is used in Arizona for voting. And the paper, and I've got a lot of questions there. It's things that I think that people in Arkansas will find very useful here as well. I'm Colonel Conrad Reynolds with the Kernel of Truth, and we'll be back in a minute with our guest, Mark Finchem. Welcome back to the Kernel of Truth. It's Colonel Conrad Reynolds, and I'm here with my special guest, Mark Finchem out of Arizona. He was a candidate for the Secretary of State there. Mark is probably one of the most knowledgeable people, particularly when it comes to election integrity and the things that need to get done to have safe and fair elections. And he's been fighting this fight in Arizona, and he has a lot of things to offer here. Mark, we were talking about at the break about paper ballots, and that's a big push that we've had here in Arkansas, and we were trying to get a secure paper ballot to be used, and we continually get fought back by a lot of Republicans here in our state and Democrats, but they're fighting us saying, oh, we don't want to go back to 30 or 40 years ago. We've seen all the cheating that occurred. We don't want that at all. We want machines. Tell us about your experience in Arizona and the paper ballot you guys came up with.
Well, if anybody who says that is engaged in careless disregard of the facts, as bad as fraud might have been, cheating might have been 30 years ago, it's now on steroids with machines that you're not permitted to see the code. You're not permitted to do a comparative hand count of paper ballots against the machine tabulation. So in a recent presentation that we made to the Gila County Board of Supervisors, I was permitted to speak and kind of walked through paper ballots and hand counting at the precinct level, counting on election day, not before. And the chairman of the county board in my closing said, do you have anything else to say? I said, well, I just have one question for you. If you're not permitted to compare the paper ballots with a machine count, how do you know what the real results were? And his response was stunning. We don't. Now, the media didn't report that comment, but instead wanted to vilify me for going back to the days of buggy whips. Okay,
right.
Well, as a criminal investigator for at least 18 years of my 21-year career with the city of Kalamazoo, I will tell you that the best evidence is paper. Hard stop.
Sure.
Because if you have tight controls of chain of custody on your paper, on the paper ballots once cast, you minimize the potential for fraud. Now, there's always going to be fraud in the system because you have got individuals who they're reprobate minds. They are going to do what they are going to do. And I would expect in the 2024 election, we are going to see a variation of the fraud that we saw in 2020, which varied to 2022. These guys are always looking for a new and inventive way to pull shenanigans. Okay. That's why the Election Fairness Institute was stood up, so that we can anticipate that and go on the offense against these people who are engaged in that kind of behavior. Now, Arizona already has a form of watermark on our ballots. It's called vote secure paper that has a coating on it, that if paper from the outside somehow makes it in, unless it's vote secure paper, it won't be counted because they can run that through and verify that a ballot either is or isn't. If it isn't on vote secure paper, it's not a legitimate ballot. Okay. Now, for those who say, well, you can't do paper ballots hand counting by the precinct level on election day, I'm going to say poppycock. They're doing it in Louisiana. There are other states that are doing it. And now, as of this last weekend, a masterful stroke. I'm not happy about the way they rolled it out, but the Maricopa County Republican Committee passed a resolution that calls on the Arizona GOP to withdraw from the presidential primary election. Now, what that means is that we will not have government do the election. The party will do the election instead.
Wow.
Number one, it sends a powerful vote of no confidence at the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, the elections officials, and quite frankly, one of the biggest frauds in election in Arizona, Stephen Richer, who is the Maricopa County recorder. It says we couldn't trust you for the 2022 election. We can't trust you for the 2024 election because of your misinformation, your maladministration, your misfeasance and malfeasance in the last election in 2022. We don't trust you. So you're fired. We're going to take that responsibility away from you. And the AZ GOP at the county level, now that's if this happens, the AZ GOP at the county level will conduct an election where you will have paper ballots. You're going to have to go to the polls, not doing any mail-in ballots, vote in person. Now, we have early voting that runs 30 days in advance of the election, but you're going to have to go present ID in order to get a ballot. You're going to have to be a registered Republican to get a ballot.
So
you're
close primary.
That ballot. You're going to turn it in at the precinct level. So we're going to have an opportunity to absolutely shame and discredit the individuals who are testifying in front of county boards and lying, quite frankly, that the cost of doing a hand count on paper ballots is going to be outrageous. No, it's not. No, it's not.
No,
it's going to be minuscule compared to what we're paying now because they're not taking into account all of the cost that goes on with the machines and the litigation that goes on behind it. So we'll have one race that'll be counted on paper at the precinct level on election day. Think about that for a minute. We are now defining, I'm going to put this in kind of Six Sigma terms. We're now defining the throughput equation for how many people does it take to count a race within a certain time frame. Once you know that, you know how many volunteers and paid staff you need to have to count the real election. when I say real election, I'm talking about the general election, because that'll be, unfortunately, that is going to be run by the county governments. But it gives us some insight into how to manage that. So for those people who say, and I know there are a number of folks around the country that say, no, machines are all that in a bag of chips. You know what? That's fine. Furnish us with open source code so we can make sure that there is no malware, that there is no manipulation, and don't turn off the logs. We need to be able to see every keystroke that happens in that election. And if there's a keystroke missing, or if the system goes down, it voids the election, because they're manipulating it with machines, both internally and externally. The big lie that we saw is that, oh, no, the machines don't have access to the internet. Poppycock.
Yeah.
They're built with access to the internet.
Well, the problem is
specified that way.
Well, the problem is there that none of the states have the kind of equipment and people necessary to be able to test these machines during elections, to even see. They have no idea. All they're doing is taking the manufacturers what they're saying, and we have seen problems with some of these companies and lying and saying that the machines were not online when in fact they were. But I do have a quick question when it comes to this primary you're talking about. What about the HAVA requirements? Are there none? There's the Help America Vote. There are none. Is that correct?
Not for the presidential primary election. That is a party only. That's a partisan election.
Right.
Party only. The Democrats are not involved in it. The only way an independent can be involved in it is if they specifically request a Republican ballot. Mm-hmm. We can't deny them that. But this is not covered by HAVA.
That's amazing. So real quickly, so it's not covered by HAVA, and so you have open primaries. Is that correct right now? Or
no, we have a closed primary.
You have a closed primary. Yeah. By the way, just so you know, we tried to get closed primaries here in Arkansas. In fact, we had 3 districts that voted to put it into the RPA. It's in the RPA platform that we want to have closed primaries. Well, guess what? The Rules Committee made sure that didn't happen. They made sure.
Well,
that
then your Rules Committee is made up of, with all due respect, your Rules Committee is made up of a bunch of morons. Here's the strategy that the opposition employs. They are going to use the open primary system in order to promote the candidate that they think will be easiest to beat. Mm-hmm. That means you're going to have Democrats voting in a primary for a Republican in order to get the weakest jellyfish in the ocean on the ballot so that they have a better opportunity to beat them. So why your rules platform people in the Republican Party, there's another bunch of scoundrels that needs to be removed. Protection of that authority within your own party ought to be the number one priority of those people. And clearly it's not. Yeah,
clearly. I mean, it really baffles the mind. But in our last
Why would you let a Democrat tell you who your Republican candidate is going to be?
It makes no sense.
We compare it to like a college football game. If Arizona State got to pick Arizona's quarterback before the game, why would you allow the other team to do that?
Well, we've got exactly. Well, listen, we got a couple minutes left, Mark, and I want you to quickly tell us in the next couple of minutes about your race, because I think that's important.
Yeah. So while we're waiting for the court case on the Secretary of State thing, because we might get a new election, and if we do, I would have to withdraw from the state Senate race that I have entered in Legislative District 1, which is up by Prescott. Uh-huh. So I'm running for that in order to help set the stage for revising, standing in the way of hard leftist attempts to overtake our election system.
Okay.
Now, we've got a senator up there who, quite frankly, he's Mr. Go Along to get along. He's been a candidate many times. I'm not even going to use his name. Folks can look it up. But people are very excited that I've entered the race up there. That is Trump country, and they still remember that Mark Finchem was endorsed by President Trump. Right. For the Arizona Secretary of State. And there was a reason for that, because I stood up when very few people would not. In fact, even Leo and Sonny would say, you stood up when nobody else did.
Well,
you brought us along. And we appreciate that. We thank you for that. So having a senator, having state representatives who are more interested in service than they are with making friends. It's not that I'm antagonistic to people, and I'm not. Some people would say I'm gruff and I'm a bit abrupt, but when somebody's trying to BS me, I'm going to call them on it. That's what I was elected to do. So if people want to know more about my campaign for the state Senate,
give us a website.
They can visit votefinchem.com. That's VOTE, F like Frank, INCHE like Edward, M like Mark.com.
So we got two. We got that one, and then you also got the Election Fairness Institute, which is EFI.org as well.
That's correct. That's correct. And, I'm going to make the pitch here. Sorry. All of this takes money.
Right.
And, we're not going to turn away a $20 bill from anybody. Now, if there are donors out there that, in fact, you've got some very generous donors out there. I'm not going to use names because I would want to check with them first. But you've got some very generous donors in Arkansas that are helping EFI. I expect they're probably going to help me with my state Senate campaign. But it kind of goes back to, why do you give somebody the product of your toil, your sweat, your time, your talent? Don't give money to the state party or the RNC. Look your candidate in the eye and ask them plainly, will you stand up for election security and integrity? Because I see by your record, you're not exactly strong on that. And if they waver for a moment, don't give them a nickel. Now, when you find a warrior, kind of like, I don't know, Conrad Reynolds.
Oh, well, thank you.
Have put some fire on that guy.
Right. Well, Mark,
help to fund that kind of activity, because the more people like you, Conrad, and me, and Sonny, and Leo, and just patriots all over the country who are more interested in service to the people than service to themselves, the more of those we put into office and we revere, the harder it will be for the radical left to take over our country completely. Right now, we're in a holding action.
Right. Well,
we got to go on the offense.
Well, Mark, we've run out of time, but buddy, it has been wonderful. Thank you for coming on our show. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much, Conrad.
That's right.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
God bless you, man.
Thank you. God bless you too. Then that's our last segment for the Kernel of Truth. Thank you very much. Y'all come back next week for another exciting show. Take care. Give this video a thumbs up, if you will. Like and subscribe to our channel. Very important for us to spread this message to everybody, and I can't do it without your help. This is the Kernel of Truth, and I'm Colonel Conrad Reynolds, and thank you for joining us.